This is the study I decided to do, and it's major doctrines we've learned since May 21, 2011, because I know these things. These major doctrines that we've learned that is new to us, and some of them are even new as far as you would have never heard them before. Not in past theological writings, not in commentaries. These are things that we've learned because of the major doctrine number 1, which is May 21 was Judgment Day. Without that understanding, we wouldn't have learned any of these others. May 21, 2011 was Judgment Day. And if somebody doesn't understand that, yeah, of course they can understand what's being said about these things, but they're not going to have real understanding of any of these other doctrines. And yet when you do understand that, all of a sudden it opens up all kinds of information, which is why we've continued to learn. And it's kind of a key that unlocks the Lord's bringing forth the hidden information, the hidden truth, and the mysteries of the Bible for the day of judgment. And yet that's the point where so many have gone back from. When they reached that date and they didn't see anything with their physical eyes, they went back from it and returned to church or returned to, the world or former doctrines. Maybe they didn't go back to church, but now they're reanalyzing, doubting all those other wonderful truths that the Lord opened up during the Great Tribulation time. You see, that's the understanding of May 21 Judgment Day. When you know it was, and of course, if you know that it was Judgment Day, then that's built on all this other information with the Great Tribulation timeline. And to have the Great Tribulation timeline, you have to know judgment began at the house of God, that the church age is over. All that goes along with it. And so I think the first major doctrine that God showed us, the date of May 21, 2011, was Judgment Day. And actually, we had to relearn it because prior to May 21, 2011, Judgment Day, exclamation point, the Bible guarantees it, was what we were proclaiming, and it was on billboards, it was on buses. And then it didn't happen as we expected it to happen. And so we had to go back to the Bible and see, was it possible we made a mistake? I know people don't think that I was studying, critics out there, they just think that E-Bible Fellowship just stubbornly, kept going along out of pride because we didn't want to humble ourselves and admit that we were wrong. We just continued following along. But the truth is that I was studying and others were studying, and we were looking at the information that locked in the date of May 21, 2011. And what we saw was it still locked in the date of May 21, 2011. That there was no error, no mathematical error in calculation. There was no error in the timelines from the flood to that date and so forth. And it just didn't enter into our minds that the judgment on the world would be a spiritual judgment. And that meant that the Bible was still insisting it was Judgment Day despite what our eyes saw. And, that brings us to the second major doctrine we've learned since May 21, 2011, is that Judgment Day is spiritual. It's spiritual. That is, God brought a spiritual judgment on the world. And that is something I don't think you can find if you check like church writings and you read the theologians of the past, that God would bring to pass a spiritual judgment. We didn't even find Mr. Camping talking about that prior to May 21, 2011. It was all physical. Everything had to be physical. The great earthquake, the 5 months period, the resurrection of the dead and the bodies being scattered across the face of the earth, the catastrophe that would come across the face of the earth. And whenever I think about that, I think the reason is probably because we know the world doesn't perceive spiritual things, and God would tailor a judgment that would fit them, that would be appropriate for them, in order for them to really see it and experience it, to know it. We thought they'd have to see it with their eyes. They would have to see Christ coming, or the great earthquake and literal graves opening up. And no, that was incorrect. And we should have known better. We should have known better. Why do I say that? Well, because God's a spirit, the law is spiritual, the Bible's main focus is on man's soul, which is spiritual. It's all a matter of whether you're dead in sin, dead in your soul, or made alive in soul. And you can't tell. I can't tell. Looking out, I have no idea. Nobody can tell. That's why God says, don't judge, because you'll get it wrong. Don't point the finger at anybody. It's all in the spiritual realm. I mean, we could go on. Satan is a spirit being. The demons are spiritual. The kingdom of God is spiritual. And on and on and on. Everything about the Bible is spiritual, even though it's a physical book and, paper and ink. But its main teaching is always spiritual. And then when we look at the judgments, the major judgments of the Bible, beginning with the first back in the Garden of Eden, spiritual. In the day you eat thereof, you will surely die, was the warning given to Adam and Eve. And then they ate. And, look and see what happens. Did he drop over physically dead? No, but he did die in that very day in his soul, dead in trespasses and sins. And the judgment on Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane, spiritual. The judgment on the church is spiritual. Even all the physical judgments, the destructions of cities and so forth in the Bible, always taught spiritual things. The flood taught spiritual truth. Sodom and Gomorrah's destruction taught spiritual truth. And so we should not have been surprised, but we were, and that's how God laid the snare. That's how he laid the trap for the world, and that's how he's developed his testing program for Judgment Day by just simply following the pattern that he's always followed, which is bringing to pass a spiritual judgment. And there were other tip-offs to the fact that he would do that in Jeremiah 25. Give the cup of wrath first to the city called by my name, then take the same cup, give it to the nations of the world. Okay, well, if we understood that cup of wrath given to the house of God, the churches and congregations, to be a spiritual judgment, and it's an identical cup given then to the nations of the world, why would it change? Why would it not be the same? Now, it needs to be pointed out that although it's a spiritual judgment, it will conclude with a literal physical destruction on the last day. And somebody was asking me that yesterday, that they didn't see where the Bible taught that, and it has to be. It has to be. How's God going to bring in a new heaven and a new earth? How's he going to allow a cursed creation, which this world and universe is, not to mention mankind, to continue to exist into eternity future? You think it's going to last forever? No, it has to be destroyed. And therefore, 2 Peter 3 is simply describing a literal physical destruction. And the word there, where it speaks of the elements, it's actually a word that means being loosed, which would tie in perhaps with what happens with the atom in an atomic explosion. So if God looses the atoms of the whole creation, this world and the universe, it would be an enormous explosion, which would result in melting with fervent heat in an instant or quicker, and then it's all gone. It's all gone, and then we enter into the new creation. So we know absolutely this world must be destroyed. It's not going to be made over. It's going to be absolutely, utterly destroyed, and a new heaven and new earth will come. And so any language in the Bible that does describe a literal physical destruction would be on the final day of this prolonged judgment.